Cled and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, though the New Orleans runoff elections were last November, the changes brought about by them finally take place next week as a new mayor and council take office. We'll look tonight at the condition of the city in fighting crime as the changes take effect and at the new city council. In Baton Rouge, there will be a change in the Secretary of State's office, and the regular session of the legislature nears its last month. We'll also examine the tradition of agencies handing out special badges. Our Future Watch segment looks at riverfront hotel development. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Kevin McGill, reporter, The Associated Press; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter; and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4. And we go to Mike first. We heard from Mayor-elect, almost Mayor Cantrell, about her public safety team, and they're going to be dealing with a crime issue still in New Orleans. It has not going to go away this weekend, unfortunately. So what are they looking at?
Yeah, how many mayors have we seen come and go, and they inherit what is listed as a top priority among citizens is crime. Yep. Cantrell is no different. She takes office Monday, and she is inheriting a mixed picture on the crime front. There has been very recently an uptick in robberies, and that's always alarming because those tend to be stranger crimes, random, they're spread throughout the city. Shootings are about steady with the pace of late last year, but the shootings that lead to homicide are down slightly. But once again, we always put that into context of, you know, sort of the national measures. New Orleans, even when that is down a little bit, we're still in the top 5 per capita in murder rate. So there have not been dramatic strides under Mitch Landrieu, despite a lot of effort, a lot of attention. The whole NOLA for Life program, which was specifically targeted at shootings and killings. Big question going in for Cantrell is whether she keeps that program or pieces of it. It's actually an umbrella program with many different components, including midnight basketball and ceasefire, job programs, and there have been questions raised by some of her transition team members as to whether the city's been getting its bang for the buck from NOLA for Life.
A lot of those things are grant funded, aren't they?
Well, it started as grant funded, but most of it has transitioned to the city paying the bill. It's upwards over, I think it's $26 million total over the lifespan of the program. It's not going to be easy to dismantle simply because it is 20 individual programs, some of which are highly successful, some of which are rightfully questioned as to their effectiveness.
And these are just, these are really grassroots types of programs.
A lot of them are, yes.
Right there in the community. Some of them actually interact with community members who maybe are going to get into something with one another, and they try to literally interrupt that.
Oh yeah, there's violence interrupters. They are actually, paid to go into neighborhoods, and it's been, I guess, it started and most effective in Central City, where there's a high concentration both of violent crime and the ceasefire program's violence interrupters. I think that that really falls into Cantrell's, vision of how she wants to run the city, which is very grassroots oriented, listening to, people in neighborhoods. I think that was maybe a hard program to take away, but we will see once she gets her whole team in place, including, she's naming a new criminal justice coordinator, Tanisha Stevens, right. Investigator over at the district attorney's office, bringing what hopefully will be a little louder, voice from that coordinating council. Usually that's sort of a figurehead position that, assembles all the different components of the criminal justice system around a table, but we've seen very little ideas and results. So I'm sure that, like every mayor going in, she really wants to make that an effective position.
Well, she seems to want more funds too. Just one second, Errol. She seems to want more money for criminal court and for the jail.
Well, and that's, this is a cash-strapped city, as we all know. The biggest issue, and this came up a lot among her transition team, is the financial burden of 2 consent decrees, one for the police department, one for the sheriff's office and the jail. And one of the missions that she's identified is to accelerate this consent decree process for the police department and get out from under a very, very heavy financial burden. It looks like the consent decree for the jail, there's no end in sight. There are no easy solutions there, but the police department has made great strides, and they're starting to, there's starting to be some friction within the police department as to, the reforms seem to have taken root. They've seemed to have taken root under the current police chief, Michael Harrison, who's being retained.
Yeah.
And obviously, one of the factors in keeping him around is that he has shepherded this consent decree to what is at least the midpoint or beyond, and they are really adamant about not paying the outside firms and consultants and observers all of this money under that consent decree.
Let me get over to Errol. You had something?
Well, I was going to ask about that, about the decision to keep Chief Harrison. That's one of the major decisions any mayor has to make.
That's true, and what we heard was that he was never going to be replaced right away. She had talked about a national search that might take place, in months, 6 months or more after she takes office. But the talk of a national search now has cooled down. So it looks like it's Chief Harrison's job to lose. Obviously, they'll be working together very closely as soon as she takes office. That's always a top priority, one of the biggest and busiest departments in the city. And so it's really an opportunity for him to audition and maybe, prove himself to be the best man for that job. It's always difficult to cast a wide national net and find somebody, especially given in the middle of a consent decree. Not a lot of really high caliber police executives want to, parachute into an existing consent decree, midway through.
Right. Well, the new mayor and the public safety people that she's named or are keeping have still their challenges before them.
Oh yeah, and she's going to be obviously monitoring for serious progress. Obviously, poll after poll shows it remains at the top of people's priorities.
Right, indeed it does. They want safe streets. Thanks a lot, Mike. Errol, back over to you now. And we are getting almost a whole new council.
Out of a 7-member council, we're getting 5 new members to the council, so that's a pretty change. And for the first time, the males have been almost extinct on the council. I mean, there was a time when it was all female, but this time you have a bare male majority at 4-3. But it just kind of shows the flux in the council and the different directions, and for there's a council member who claims to be white Hispanic in Helena Moreno. There's a Vietnamese American council member. There's black council members, and so there is a diverse council. Probably the most that there's ever been. But of the 5 changes in District A, Susan Guidry. This is a district that's pretty much the lakefront, Lakeview area. Just decided not to run again. And she's replaced by Joseph Giarrusso III, who is the grandson of the former police chief, who was also a council member at large. And his mother is Judge Robin Giarrusso, and so there's a real family degree. And actually, his grandfather's brother was also a police chief, too, so there's a real background there. By the way, Joseph Giarrusso, the council member, was a real champion back when there was an issue about outlawing smoking in public places. That was really one of his big issues. Latoya Cantrell, of course, is going on to greener pastures, and replacing her is Jay Banks, who's won 2 major elections in his life so far. One is being elected councilman member to District B. The other was 2 years ago when he was elected Zulu, which is quite an honor. But he's part of the old BOLD political organization, which for a long time was very influential in this area. Cantrell was not, and so she was a little bit different from that, but there's a bold person back in there. Nadine Ramsey was defeated by Kristen Palmer, who had that council seat 4 years before. And Palmer ran again a very, very close election. This is a really tough district to represent because it combines Algiers and the French Quarter and Bywater and Marigny. There's all kinds of a real mix of issues, a lot of preservation issues, a lot of development issues, and there's always contentiousness in this district. District E, and probably this is the most difficult of all the districts, James Gray, who was elected 4 years ago, was defeated by Cindy Nguyen. And this is interesting because this is the first example of a Vietnamese American being elected to the city council. Now, if you remember Councilman Gao of a few years ago, who was Vietnamese American. So Cindy Nguyen would be the first, not the first elected, but certainly the first elected to the council. But it just shows, because this is a district that's 87% black, and people want change in that district. This is a district that has the most difficult time trying to get economic activity going on there, trying to get development, trying to get retailers to move in there. And every time there's a council race, the council candidate's saying, I promise I'm going to do more, and it just never really happens. And another big change is Stacey Head, who decided not to run again. Technically, when she was elected 4 years ago in a special election, she could have waited a few days, and the numbers would have been that she would have been allowed to run for another term, but she decided not to do that. I mean, she wanted her term to be over this time, and Helena Moreno, who we first knew was a reporter on Channel 6 and then went on to a legislative career, has that. A lot of people, when they look at these elections, I think they see the rising stars, one of the rising stars in New Orleans politics, being Helena Moreno. The two people who are returning are the other at-large member, which is Jason Williams, and in District D, Jared Brissett. That's kind of in the Gentilly area, who got some good reviews a few weeks ago by getting an ordinance passed that said that pushes back the booting. Right. And so it's going to be an interesting council.
It definitely is, and then certainly that's something that everybody always says. This council is definitely going to be interesting with it.
Yeah, and one person I really want to acknowledge, though, because I think one person who was really interesting out of all this was Stacey Head. Mm-hmm. When she was elected in 2006, it was at this time after Katrina, and no one really knew who she was. She kind of came from out of nowhere. She ran against the old Bill Jefferson organization in an area where they were strong. She had a lot of run-ins with the Nagin administration, a lot of clashes, but I don't think anybody ever questioned her integrity and the toughness of her questions.
So who do you think takes the role of the Stacey Head, sort of being a dissenting vote or, calling out the administration when necessary?
I guess that remains to be seen. I think you stumped them on that one.
I don't know at this point. But she was a classic example of a citizen politician. I mean, someone that kind of came from out of nowhere, elected, held office, and then left.
And as you said, nobody questioned her integrity, that's for sure. All right, thanks a lot, E. Over to Kevin right now. We're going to our Secretary of State stepped down amid sexual harassment claims.
Yeah, it's a fairly astounding fall for Tom Schedler. He goes way back quite a few years in Louisiana government. He was very well respected state legislator from the state Senate. I think it could be argued that he was seen as a very efficient and nonpartisan Secretary of State and had wide respect and probably could have gone on to re-election for that again. And yet it surfaced, there were allegations in a lawsuit, and they seem to be borne out by published emails that for years and years he was perpetrating sexual harassment. There was one woman in particular in the Secretary of State's office. He denied the allegations for quite some time, said that they had a consensual sexual relationship. The woman, in fact, said they had no such sexual relationship, consensual or otherwise, and said that he had been harassing her for years and years and years. The pressure got to the point where Schedler said he would not run for re-election. He, I guess, hoped that would cause the overall political furor to subside. I don't think it was, and then came the publication by the Advocate in late April of emails just bearing out the woman's claims, and it was clear that he would have to resign. He stepped down a few days ago, or announced that he would be stepping down, I think effective probably Monday. Mm-hmm. And Kyle Ardoin is his replacement. There's already some complaints that Ardoin should have known something about what was going on here. In the interim, he will be Secretary of State, though it appears, and I believe the election to formally replace Tom Shedler, the earliest it can be held will be November 6th. I think it's going to be up to Governor Edwards' office to decide when that will happen, though.
And there's already a long list of potential candidates running for it.
Yeah, it's bound to be a lot of people who want that race.
So what I'd like for you to touch on kind of quickly right now, too, is what's happening in the legislature regarding sexual harassment.
There's a couple of bills. Each chamber has a bill, and generally, and I think this goes on to some other cases, and it's also a reflection of the Me Too movement nationally, that people are finally becoming aware of what's going on and trying to adjust to it. A couple of bills that will actually set some policies and penalties and require training of state employees and set certain protections for the people who claim sexual harassment by members of state government or supervisors in state agencies. Now, I think one has passed each chamber. How they'll be reconciled and what the details ultimately will be isn't exactly clear yet. But obviously, this is Shedler's experience comes into play here.
Okay, we'll see what moves through the legislature, and then we'll be back to you in just a little bit more to talk about what is happening in the legislature. Okay. If there's anything happening in the legislature, we know that there is. So we'll talk to Kevin a little bit more about that. First now to Dawn. And hotel development for a Future Watch segment on the riverfront.
World Trade Center World Trade Center site at the foot of Canal Street is finally, we've sat on this program several times. I think this was the third round of bids to redevelop this building that finally is actually farther than any other project has gotten. An official groundbreaking for construction took place this past Wednesday. The 341-room, Four Seasons hotel and residences, 90 condos, is expected to be complete in late 2020. It is what the developers are calling the largest private investment the city's ever seen, nearly $500 million. An exterior construction elevator is getting ready to go up so that they can go in from the top down and work on demolition of the building. It's a 1960s office building. It housed WGNO, where I worked when I first got here. It was the World Trade Center. It used to have the top of the Mart spinning bar. It is going back completely into commerce in a 99-year agreement with the city. The city does own the land. And the Downtown Development District says it's really a game changer for that end of the city. While they've been working on revitalizing Canal Street, aside from Canal Place, there was no real anchor to the end of Canal Street. The building, when the tall ships were in town 2 weeks ago, I walked past it. It's in terrible shape. It's covered with graffiti and just looked awful. It's an eyesore right across the street from Harrah's. It's all changing. So it looks like good news for the city, both from a tax perspective and from really revitalizing that end of Canal Street.
And it was one man who delayed it for a couple of years just with lawsuits.
Just with lawsuits, because he thought it was not a fair deal. He did not have the financial backing to actually go through and put his own hotel there, but delayed it through 2 years, ended up ultimately before the state Supreme Court, which refused to hear it, and 2 years of litigation slowed it all the way down. The original plan was to have it finished for the 300th birthday. Instead, construction starts for the 300th birthday of the city. Right across the street from there is Harrah's Casino, which, working its way through the legislature right now, is a plan to extend their lease and give them more opportunity to build a new hotel right on the site. And it's hard to even picture, because it looks like the site is full, but there's room apparently in the Port Cochere area in the front where the gardens are to construct a 24-story, 340-room hotel that has passed through the House right now. That has to get out of a Senate committee next week. The vote is on Tuesday. That would really change up that whole end of Canal Street if there were two hotel towers right across the street from one another. And then the third potential new downtown hotel would be part of Convention Center Phase 4. That's been kind of another one of those things that it was going to be finished for the 300th birthday of the city. Now there's been nothing official announced yet, but it would be a hotel at the upriver end of the convention center.
Okay, so more hotel rooms. Definitely we see one hotel for sure with the Four Seasons finally groundbroken.
Finally groundbroken.
All righty, Don, thanks a lot. We're going to go back over to Kevin. Kevin, Don sort of touched on it. Harrah's, that's a big thing now that people weren't expecting the controversy that has arisen.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty over a couple of things going on at the legislature right now. The main one is the budget, but the Harrah's contract extension, which would have been and maybe still will be a 30-year contract extension, that appeared to be going through pretty easily, even though the current contract doesn't expire for, I believe, another 6 more years. Some people were saying, what's the hurry? Now more people are saying, what's the hurry, because of news that broke in The Advocate that it was the hotel, Harrah's or the hotel might be up for sale. And
the Harrah's itself might be up for sale to a real estate investment trust.
Yeah, and with that, a lot of people started thinking, well, what's the hurry with extending this lease? Are we going to be, Senator John Kennedy was pressing the legislators to put the brakes on and saying, why would we, are we going to be leaving some money on the table if we agree to this? Right now, they were talking about an additional $7 million a year, 2% increases every 5 years. I mean, on the face of it,
and a $21 million upfront payment.
Yeah, on the face of it, it looked like a good deal. But again, with the news of the possible sale, that's got that kind of on hold. And then, of course, while that the uncertainty over what's going to happen with that is in the air, there is the matter of the $27 billion state budget. You have to go back to earlier this year when the governor called a special session to try and replace more than $1 billion worth of taxes, mostly sales taxes that go off the books on July 1st. That, of course, failed. There's the regular session began. We're in an even-numbered year, and constitutionally, a regular session can't raise revenue. So even with some improvement in the economic picture, both from the state economy and from the federal tax overhaul, the state is still looking at a $650 million, I'm going to use the word shortfall over what I think there's a consensus that everyone thinks we ought to have. The House went ahead and passed a budget without that $650 million, and it looks like state hospitals take the brunt of it right now, to the extent that the private entities that have contracted with the state to run hospitals in New Orleans, Shreveport, Monroe, Bogalusa, Lafayette, they've all said, we're not going to be able to do it. Right. We close on July 1st. People who run the teaching hospitals say this is going to be devastating. That budget is now in the hands of the Senate Finance Committee. There'd been some talk that maybe they just shouldn't do a budget in the session early, go to a special session, raise the revenue, find some consensus, maybe with either decimation of TOPS or decimation of hospitals or something hanging over their heads. They'll find a consensus and find a way to fund all of this. But there's no guarantee that'll happen, so there seems to be a feeling in the Senate right now, let's pass some kind of budget, and then we'll come back in that special session and see if we can replenish some of the holes. But whatever the House and the Senate, they're both majority Republican, but the House is much more conservative. The Senate is more moderate, somewhat more amenable to Governor Edwards' plans. There's no guarantee that they're going to come up with a version where their $650 million of cuts are going to match anyway what the House sides are going to be, and that they'll be able to reach a consensus.
So isn't the pressure ratcheting up because we had a failed special session? It looks like we have kind of a dummy budget that no one's taking seriously, and eventually you're going to have to pass a realistic budget.
The pressure is ratcheting up, but who knows how much pressure it's going to take before a consensus is reached in this legislature, where the divisions in the Louisiana legislature finally seem to match what's going on in Washington now.
And so the idea of ending this regular session early, that seems to be dimming more and more.
It's up in the air. There's a consensus among, or there's a stated consensus among the governor's office, the speaker's office, and the Senate president's office, from what I understand, that they'd like to do it. But I was talking with our correspondent in Baton Rouge this morning about all of that. There are still some House bills hung up in House committees that have to make it through the entire session. The session has, by law, to end by June 4th. Right. But the idea of in again early and call it a special session. That first special session cost, I think, $650,000,
The idea was to save
and there
some
was a
bucks there.
failure.
Yeah.
They don't want to do that again.
All right, Kevin, thanks a lot. Quickly over to Mike now, and some badges that are being handed out by our state attorney general, which other agencies do too.
Well, it's an age-old Louisiana tradition, very popular among sheriffs to give honorary badges, and we were surprised to find out that the Attorney General, Chief Legal Officer of the state, has his own program giving out not just credentials, but actual police-style badges that come in a little leather case. And we did a public record request, got the complete list of the 106 recipients, found that a good chunk, more than a third, were campaign contributors. Many others on the list are just longtime political operatives and some Republican Party people. And it did raise some questions, because these honorary badges have been abused in the past. Many colorful stories about badges being pulled out to get out of tickets or DWIs, or even worse, used to pull people over. And
no, we're not saying by the state attorney general's
Right.
office or people within there, but by some other agencies.
So, Jeff Lander takes office 2016. We also found out that he was just continuing a program that had been done by previous attorneys general, giving out these badges. But in this era of transparency and reform, it is being questioned as to why take that risk. There's always the potential for abuse, even though none of the attorney general's badges have been abused as far as we know. Right. Now, we also found out that these are people being listed as honorary staff, right. Some of whom bring expertise in engineering, medicine, and a lot of lawyers who have been called upon to give sort of free expertise or consulting to the AG. The vast majority appear to have never been called or contacted. Some actually tried to give their badges back. So another colorful chapter.
The badges say staff.
It does say staff, right.
But they're not really
whip that
staff.
thing out, it looks like a law enforcement badge.
Okay, all right, Mike, thanks a lot. It is time now to look ahead. Dave.
Imagine owning a basketball team that's in the NBA playoffs and owning a racehorse that's in the Kentucky Derby all in the same weekend. And Gail Benson will face this. Her horse, Lone Sailor, runs tomorrow. It's trained by New Orleanian Tom Amos. It's not favored. It's a long shot, but it will be running. But incidentally, this will be the 30th anniversary of the year that Risen Star, which was owned by Louis Roussel and Ronnie Lamarck, lost the Derby but won the Preakness and the Belmont. So it was a big year 30 years ago.
Okay. Kevin.
Not sure if it'll happen this coming week, but it appears the legislature is close to passing a constitutional amendment. Voters will have to decide on it, doing away with the allowing 10-2 verdicts for serious crimes. It'd have to be unanimous juries.
Okay. Don.
The Senate committee vote is supposed to be Tuesday on the Harris lease extension and hotel. And then it would go on to the full Senate.
Okay. Mike?
I have a two-part series that's airing next week on Channel 4, WWL-TV, Wednesday and Thursday. And it's a little different than your traditional investigation, but it's a very, very in-depth look, almost anatomy, of a horrible crime spree that has now shattered lives, both on the perpetrator side, victim side, DAs, police haunted by this, and we went and talked to many of them for this story.
Wednesday and Thursday?
Wednesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock.
Mike, thanks. Thanks, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
So we.
McLeod and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.